I found some really unusual eyelet. I think I got it at Hobby Lobby. It's got a border eyelet on one side and on the other side, which means I could make a sleeve on this side and on the other side too with this edge. I'm going to make a blouse for my daughter. She doesn't know it yet, but she's had the same blouse for like 7 or 8 years. I think it's time to give her an upgrade. I'm going to make a pattern. I made this pattern off of her blouse. This is going to have a square neckline, and this is going to be super gathered. Even though this has lots of holes in it, I figure if we gather it enough, it won't be too see-through. It's going to have a wider shoulder. The blouse she had before, it kind of came in quite a bit, and she had trouble, seems like it always kind of ducked behind her dirndl. I'm going to make a little change on the blouse. The blouse sleeve pattern is pretty wide. I decided to make it a little less full. That's a little more youthful, and I think because of the cute border on this, I'm going to let this border be right here, and I'll put elastic or something to gather it a little bit, maybe an inch or so up, make it a little shorter. I'm not sure yet. I'll decide as I lay the pattern out how I'm going to exactly do it. The fact that it's this high of a slope means that it will have a little fullness on the top. If I sloped it a little bit less, it'd be much more of a more tailored small blouse. And if she doesn't like it after I make it, somebody else will be happy to wear it, I'm sure. I'm thinking right here that I might have no lace on the sides and have lace come up. I think that'd be really fun to do. I've got to think of how to do that exactly. All right, I've got my work cut out for me. This is where the fun of designing comes in. Now that I have this front bodice piece all cut out, it's a little bit of a busy fabric all by itself. You see, it's got a lot of stuff going on. So when I gather up this front, let's imagine that it's super duper duper gathered up like this. It's going to be really quite pretty on its own, and I have to be cautious not to add too much foo-foo up here, otherwise it'll get to be kind of busy. So what I could do is I could add a little element of non-spotted, non-holy fabric. Like I could take some white satin and make a little, I don't know, a little strip of white satin here. That might be kind of pretty. And maybe instead of gathering this with elastic, I could just gather it like this, kind of pleat it, and then have the white satin there, or a satin ribbon. Or I could use just white bias strip. So this is where I'm trying to analyze exactly how it would turn out the best, because sometimes when you have a lot of stuff going on, you don't want it to get too busy. I haven't decided what to do yet with the front, so what I'll do, I will sew the shoulder seams together, and then after those are done, I'll do the stay stitching, because I know that has to happen either way. After I get that done, I'll make a decision about what to do about the front. I will sew the shoulder seams on the right and the left side, and after I sew them, I'm going to use my serger with white thread to serge those raw edges. Do number 2. I'm doing the stay stitching all along the neckline now. Pivoting on the corner, the front corner. I'm coming up to the next front corner. I'll come to the corner, put my needle in, and pivot. Pick the fabric up and turn it, making sure that I keep the seam allowance at around 1/2 inch. I decided to use satin bias strips to do the neckline. I'm cutting the strips about 1 1/4 inches wide. I think that would be really a nice contrast and beautiful. I made a bias strip out of this satin fabric and used my bias strip maker to fold both of the edges in. I'm going to sew that along the neckline now. I pinned the outer edge of the bias tape on the wrong side of the blouse. I'm going to try something interesting. After I sew it on, I'm going to flip the whole thing towards the inside, towards the outside, and this satin bias strip will show on the outside and look real pretty. We'll see how that goes. I sewed the satin bias strip on the inside of the bodice, carefully folded it to the outside, and I will top stitch it in place, and I'll have to be really careful because that top stitching will show, and I think that's going to look really pretty and shiny. I top stitched the satin edging down, and I had to do a little bit of hand work on the back here because this shoulder seam was kind of fluffy, so I hand stitched that on both sides actually. I'm going to use my bias tape maker to create a casing for the elastic across the front of the blouse. I put the tip through here, and using my pen I kind of advance it till the first tip comes through. And this cool little tool will fold it up. I found that you really do want to hold on to this because it is hot. I'm going to starch this, spray it a little bit as I go along. Okay, here we go. As it comes out, it's already all nicely folded. I'm going to hit it with some starch. Hit it with some steam, hit it with some starch as I go along. It makes really consistent sized bias tape. I'm folding my satin bias tape in half lengthwise, starching and ironing it as I go along. I'm not folding it squarely in half. I'm leaving one side a bit wider. That will be the side that will wrap around the blouse to the front. Now I have created this beautiful silky double fold bias tape, and it is going to add an elegant touch to this blouse. I have this little tail of the vertical satin going past the stay stitching on the front. On both sides I have the same thing, and I have it pinned down. I'm going to flip this over to the back side now. I'm pinning this nice little strip of satiny fabric all along the stay stitching along the front. So I'll be stitching starting right here at the very corner, over to the other corner. I'm going to pin it really carefully so it won't accidentally sew too far. So this is on the back side, and then I'll be flipping this satiny fabric over to the right side. I've marked each of the corners with an extra pin going up and down so that I'll start in the exact right spot. I put my needle in right at the intersection between those two pins, and now I'm going to sew straight up. There we go. I'm going to lift it up. Check it out. I will flip this around to the right side, and it just goes right in behind that little side part because I only sewed right to the corner. So I'll go around to the right side now. I'm going to turn the garment towards the right side, and here we have beautiful trim. I'm going to iron this down really flat now, which will in essence take away this first fold in the bias tape. I ironed everything down nice and flat. Now I'm flipping around this facing, which I just sewed. I'm going to lay it down here, and then I'm going to flip this down out of the way, and I will stitch from the end of the stitching here through this end here. So I'll stitch that right along that spot, which will cover up the vertical strip of satin. I'm going to do the same on this side, so same thing. I've got the vertical strip of satin coming down. I flip this around to the inside, flip all that facing and all the seam allowance down. I think I'm going to snip the rest of this off. I'm going to cut it down to where it's just a ½ inch. I've got much too much of this. There we go. I've snipped it. I'm going to fold it in, and I'll stitch just to the end of the vertical part. I have no instructions for this. I'm kind of just winging it as I go along, just kind of figuring how it'll all come out. Now that lines up perfectly. I'm going to do the same on the other side. I'll trim the excess off and fold it up. And there we go. I'll do the same on the other side. detail work is really time consuming. However, once I get this part done, the rest of the blouse will go together very quickly. It'll just be an ordinary blouse. I'm sewing that little tiny corner that will finish off the satin trim. I'm not doing it extremely right to the end because if there's anything not quite lined up, I'll finish that off with some hand sewing. I just pulled out the pins and I'll fold this down. It does look like I need to do a little hand sewing on there. Let's check out the other side looks. Take out a couple pins, fold it down, see if it lines up pretty well. Yeah, that's really great. And this will be the casing for the elastic. Now that the elastic casing has been created, I'm going to come through and trim off all of this extra stuff that's in the seam allowance so that there won't be quite so much bulk where the elastic will be. Now I'm going to flip this shiny satin around to the front and I'm going to stitch it across to make the casing. I have folded the casing all along the front and now I'm going to carefully top stitch it in place, which will make, this will show because this is the top side, and this is going to be the casing for the elastic. After I get it in, I'll insert the elastic. I'm going to stitch over this whole end one more time, so I'm not so concerned about making it all totally knit down. There we go. There's the casing. Nice and shiny, beautiful. Okay, I'm going to get my bodkin and my elastic, and here we go. I have my elastic attached to my bodkin, and I will insert it at the end here. After I get it in, and it's just loosely held, I'll stitch down this one end, and then when I get done, I'll stitch the other end. So far, so beautiful. I'm paying attention to make sure that the elastic doesn't go all the way in and I lose the end of it. Okay, the bodkin is about ready to emerge from the second side. There we go. Now I'm going to be really cautious as I pull this and tighten it to not let the other end of the elastic go all the way in. We're getting close. There we go. Now that I've got it almost all the way in, I'm going to give it a little tug. Then I'm going to stitch like a little square. There we go. I'm going to stitch a little square. There we go. It's hidden in there. Then I'll pivot one more time. The pin is still holding the elastic down until I sew over it. Then I can release the pin. There we go. Now I'm sewing the elastic, so I'll get that pin out of the way. And then I'll make one more pass across it to make sure it's really catching really well. I put the blouse underneath the dress that will be worn, and now I'm going to pull the elastic, and I'll get a kind of a real-time idea how tight to pull it. This mannequin isn't exactly the right size, but it does give an idea about how much gathering we need to do. Okay, that looks pretty good. I need to tighten it a little bit more, probably about right there. Then we'll make sure that it won't be too close to her bra showing. I think that looks pretty good. Now I'm going to go in and make sure that the elastic isn't twisty or anything like that. I think it'll look pretty nice. I stitched the elastic in one little section, and now I'm going to snip it so that it goes in there real tight. I'm going to go back over the elastic again. And then I'm going to sew that little box. Now I see that there's a little bit of funny fluffy stuff happening here, so this is the time where I think I will perhaps hand stitch it and come through and top stitch it. There's no way to get it really nice with just the sewing machine. I didn't do any gathering at all of the sleeve, and I just fit it right into the opening. It needed just a little bit of squinching, so I'm going to sew the sleeve, each of the sleeves into the openings now. Then I'll sew the side seams. After the troll of doing the front of the blouse, sewing on these sleeves is a piece of cake. That's the second sleeve sewn in. And now I'll go over to my serger and clean up those raw edges. I pinned the side seam that goes right up through the bottom of each sleeve, and that will sew the sleeves together. I'll do the first side and then the second side. First sleeve and side seam is done. I will go over and serge it after I get the second one done. After I did the underarm seams all the way down the side seams, then I serged the raw edge all the way around, and then I ironed about 1/2 inch up. I'm going to come stitch that to make a casing for the elastic for the little crop top, and that will be the final thing. And I'll stitch about 1/2 inch, and then I'll insert 3/8 inch elastic and gather it, and then I will do a little something to the sleeves. Sewing in elastic casing is a no-brainer. One thing you have to pay attention to is to make sure that you keep your spacing equal, and so that you don't have a spot where, when you're threading your elastic through, it won't fit. The second thing is, as you come back around to the spot where you started, my spot is about right here. You want to leave about 1 inch opening for your little bodkin to go in, or whatever you use to insert your elastic. There's a couple tools for that. So here's my opening right here, 1 inch, and now I'm going to feed my elastic in there. I put the elastic in the casing and I stretched it to where I thought it was right. I think I'll cut these off real quick. I'm going to sew about 1/2 inch from the end, back and forth, and then I'm going to open it up like this and stitch it again, and it'll be done. Except for something special I'm going to do to the sleeves. To make the casing for the elastic on this blouse, I took one piece of my satin bias tape. It has one fold here and one fold here, but it's only about 1 inch or so wide, and I found a little pattern on this eyelet that I could follow again and again. I didn't even have to go through and do too much measuring, but I just kind of followed the pattern. Just sewed right along that line. I left one little opening right here. Now after I've done this, I'll take this and fold it down like this, and I will very carefully stitch right along this fold line on this side, creating about 1/2 inch casing, and then I'll put my 3/8 inch elastic in here, and as it passes through here, that'll be the little opening left right where those two are, and it's in the underarm of the blouse, so you wouldn't really notice it. I have the bodkin traveling through the little satin elastic casing on the sleeve, and there it is. I will pull it through. There's not a whole lot of extra puffiness in this sleeve, so hopefully it won't look out of whack. I've got this through the casing. I'm going to pin it on itself, and then I'll pull on the other side and kind of even out the gathering. This looks really cool and sparkly. Satin is just an elegant fabric, I think. There we go. It's all in there now. I'm just going around to make sure that it hasn't twisted. Aha! It did twist. There it is. Okay, so the elastic did twist. I'm going to pull it out. There we go. I'm going to sew those little tips. Well, the whole blouse is done. I like the way it turned out. One thing I really like about this pattern, as I said earlier, is the elastic really coves in close to your body, even if you bend forward, and I like that kind of feature. Well, I hope that you enjoyed watching me make this blouse and that it inspired you to try to make your own blouse. You saw that I kind of designed it as I went along. I really love that. And I think it's just like one of the most fun creative processes around. So go get yourself some fabric, get a pattern, and start creating your own blouse. And why not have a couple blouses for Oktoberfest so you can change every day? Maybe one during the day, one in the evening, but enjoy yourself. Please take a moment to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel.